After spending several months immersed in the daily experience of the Linux desktop, testing different distributions, Debian 13, OpenSUSE, Void, Fedora, I found myself facing a reality I can no longer ignore. Spectacle, the screen recorder, has proven systematically unstable across all these platforms. Dolphin and Nautilus, the file managers that should be the beating heart of the desktop experience, have shown a worrying tendency to freeze the entire system, forcing me into hard reboots with unacceptable frequency. These direct experiences, lived on my own skin, have pushed me to confront two fundamental questions, and I know deeply controversial ones. First question: has the direction we've taken as an ecosystem in developing desktop systems and related technologies really been the wisest? Or perhaps, in our race toward innovation, have we lost our way? Second question, a direct consequence of the first: is the Linux desktop really ready to compete with the proprietary interfaces that have dominated the desktop market for decades? I'm referring to Windows, and especially macOS. I want to be clear. I'm not talking about Linux, or more precisely, GNU Linux and its varied ecosystem as a whole. The kernel, the servers, the development tools, all of this works magnificently. I'm talking specifically about the user experience of desktop interfaces, their usability, their functionality, their freshness. And I must be honest with myself, I think we're still behind in this area. 15 years ago, I remember that with GNOME 2, I could go months without ever restarting the system. These recent problems have brought back flashes from the past. I had never experienced such frustrating experiences with the Linux desktop. If I look at where we've arrived today, yes, we've taken hundreds of steps forward, but how many steps backward have we taken, and in which direction? The destructive idea introduced with GNOME 3 and KDE 3 marked a divide that I believe has become insurmountable in our ecosystem. Incompatibility at the expense of progression and scalability. If at every generational step there are catastrophic upheavals that change the paradigms of the user experience, erasing years of testing and stability, then it's inevitable that the user remains disoriented. And let's add new technologies like Fuse 3, rollback systems, Wayland, the new audio servers. Well, this is not a normal evolutionary path for a desktop environment, but a real storm unleashed inside computers. Windows and partly macOS have chosen different paths. Imperceptibility dominates. Only recently, with liquid glass, was a small revolution perceived at Apple. But we're talking about little more than a theme change, something that on KDE and GNOME can happen from one day to the next. We're behind because our applications, I'm sorry to say, are of inferior quality compared to proprietary ones. Tear your clothes, cover your ears, but in my opinion, a macOS screen recorder is clearly superior to the native GNOME and KDE counterparts. You'll be thinking it's just a small utility. Well, I'll go step by step. Otherwise, you risk a heart attack or throwing your mouse at your PC screen just hearing what follows. I have never seen the Windows file manager crash like Dolphin or Nautilus. Until a year ago, I was using a derelict Surface Go 2 with Windows, and with that misery of RAM, it barely worked. But by God, the absence of certain bugs and freezes was total. It seems so obvious to me, and at the same time so difficult to admit, as if saying what doesn't work in our ecosystem meant wishing it harm. Obviously, Linux is superior, and it's superior in philosophical vision, in power, in configuration, and in overall offering. But here I'm referring specifically to the desktop user experience. And here we're behind. In quality of programs, in their integration into the system, in the coherence offered, in consistency over time. In this field, we're just not there. The reasons for this regression are twofold. Structural, due to the endemic fragmentation of our ecosystem, but especially strategic, rooted in the fundamental choices made by our community. And I remember that, despite being a jungle of projects, distributions, and programs, we're all more or less interconnected. Every architectural decision propagates through the entire ecosystem. The problem isn't lack of talent or technology. It's a matter of priorities. The Linux desktop lives in a permanent and unsustainable contradiction. On one side, it wants to be bleeding edge, Wayland, Pipewire, new architectures, everything immediately, everything tested in production on our shoulders. On the other, It promises stability, freedom, control. But you can't have both things simultaneously. And the result, exactly what I described: a screen recorder that breaks one time out of two, a file manager that can freeze the entire system, an experience that oscillates violently between works perfectly and now I have to reboot. Let's objectively analyze what's missing. Everything needs to work without frills, to work always, for everything to be coherent and linear. And gentlemen, not accepting this fact puts your thinking in propaganda, not mine. Of course, if I looked at the situation with my personal perspective as a longtime Linux user, the fact that a screen recorder breaks one time out of two, not working or losing the recording, wouldn't be an insurmountable problem. I'd just install one of the 10 available alternatives and, after quite a hassle, I'd get what I want. Of course, using a third-party program, poorly integrated, that a user coming from Windows wouldn't even know exists. This is not acceptable. This is unacceptable if you want to compete with macOS or Windows. Not because those OSs are perfect, but because they made a choice: stability before innovation. We are bleeding edge in the wild. Wayland, Pipewire, these are all technologies introduced and tested on our shoulders at the expense of the stability of our desktops and the user experience offered. It's evident, under everyone's eyes. And this is not an attack on Wayland itself, but an attack on this mentality, on this iconoclasm, whereby the new and the future are always better than what has been tested for decades. In the Linux world, there's this almost religious mentality that the new is always better. X11 is old, throw it away, move to Wayland. Pulse Audio has problems, rewrite everything with Pipewire. Grub is complicated, let's do system deboot. And every time, who pays the price? Us, the users. Because every transition brings with it months or years of instability, incompatibility with existing software, unpredictable breakage, an ecosystem split in half between those who moved to the new and those who stayed with the old. Look at Wayland. It's been in development for 15 years, and still today, in 2025, there are use cases where X11 works better. Not because Wayland is bad, but because the transition was managed as a revolution, not as an evolution. And who suffers? The user who just wants to record the screen. We actually need conservative and more forward-thinking choices, without ending up being relics of the past like Mate Desktop. And focusing on this vision as a unified ecosystem is not at all easy. XFCE, among the three major desktops in our ecosystem, is the one that has had the most logical, healthiest development, and it shows, even though the lack of resources keeps it always a niche desktop. Too bad, because it could be the solution to a disease widespread in both GNOME and KDE. XFCE is the answer nobody wants to hear, but everyone should listen to. Why XFCE? Conservative development. They don't chase every technological fad. They don't rewrite everything every 3 years. Stability first. What works today will work tomorrow. Coherence. You don't wake up one morning with a completely redesigned interface. The problem? Lack of resources. And this is tragic, because if XFCE had even just half the budget and workforce of GNOME or KDE, it could become the Linux desktop par excellence. But instead it remains niche. Why? Because it's not sexy. It doesn't have fluid animations. It doesn't have blur effects. It doesn't get talked about on Reddit. And so while GNOME and KDE wage war over who has the most modern interface, XFCE remains in the shadows, working even though stability alone isn't enough. Innovation is also needed in the right places: accessibility, high DPI, touchscreen, gestures. XFCE is excellent for those who choose it, but it can't be the answer for everyone. And then there's the question of the Qt GTK dichotomy. What to think of this fundamental division? This is the open wound of the Linux desktop. 2 toolkits, 2 philosophies, 2 worlds that don't speak to each other. GTK, minimalist, opinionated, we know what's best for you. Qt, KDE, powerful, configurable, do what you want. And the result? Applications that seem to come from parallel universes. Open a GTK application in KDE. The themes don't match, the dialogues are different, the shortcuts don't work as you expect. Open a Qt application in GNOME, same story, in reverse. And the user? The user finds themselves with an incoherent desktop where every application seems to come from a different operating system. Is it sustainable? No. Is it solvable? Probably not. It's too late now. We should have chosen one or the other. But we chose freedom, and the price of freedom is chaos. And here lies the deep contradiction of the Linux desktop. The freedom we love is the same that generates the chaos we criticize. The coexistence of Qt and GTK isn't just a technical split. It's also the expression of a founding value, the possibility for anyone to choose different paths, not to conform to a single vision. But this freedom has a price: incoherent applications, fragmented user experiences, an ecosystem where every program seems to live in a parallel universe. Perhaps we shouldn't have chosen in an absolute sense, but at least recognized with clarity that more freedom also means more complexity. It's our strength, but also our burden. The release cycles of 6 months or 4 months are madness and are the evident fruit of an environment that competes within its own environment, fueling FOMO and doesn't compare itself instead to proprietary systems that implement proportional, linear, progressive releases that give a user experience consistent over time and especially efficient in basic functions. Yes, Windows sucks. It spies on us and is bloated, but by God, all that little it has works. Have you tried using the native screen recording tool both on Windows and on macOS? The causes are even deeper and unfortunately some insurmountable. I've been trying for some time to build a journey inside the organization of KDE. I mean the desktop itself, its governance, how it's managed, and who makes the decisions. Those who follow my videos know it well. I'm obsessed with KDE. I believe it's potentially devastating, yet it continues to have this layer of eternal incompleteness, this perception that with each release, some function is removed or added in a continuous loop of experimentation without a clear direction. From KDE 6.3 to 6.4, they completely redesigned Spectacle. It's a perfect example, rewritten mid-cycle, and it will probably be changed again in 6.5 and 6.6 and so on until it's redesigned again in KDE 7. And so I ask myself, who makes the decisions in KDE? The problem lies precisely in its management. The Council of Elders, the various developers who each have their own island to manage as they see fit, very vague objectives, feeble guidelines. The counterpart, GNOME, has instead chosen a clearer, more coherent path. But attention, it's not just about the desktop. If you leave me with a coherent applet for audio management, but meanwhile you change the audio server, inevitably something will break. It's not just a matter of interface, but of what's underneath. GNOME preaches progressive releases and gradual refinements, and for this their effort should be recognized. But on the other hand, a good part of the user experience is based on extensions that are often not compatible from one version to another. For example, I used desktop icons, an extension that by clicking it showed me the desktop, a very simple thing, yet it no longer works. Is this the promised coherence? Stable releases where essential functionalities depend on third-party code that breaks with every update. The reality is that the Linux desktop isn't behind due to lack of technical capabilities or talent. We have them in abundance. It's behind because it chose to be. It chose freedom over coherence. It chose innovation over stability. It chose ideology over pragmatism. It chose bleeding edge over reliability. And as long as we continue to make these choices, we will never be ready to compete with macOS or Windows in the daily desktop experience. We can continue to say, just install an alternative, just configure this file, just use this workaround. But the user coming from Windows or macOS, they will never do that. And until we accept this truth, this uncomfortable, painful truth, the Linux desktop will remain exactly where it is today, an extraordinary experience for those willing to suffer, and frustrating for everyone else. I said it in one of my videos, Linux needs serenity. I repeat it, and maybe I'm crazy, someone who doesn't understand anything, but it's evident that our desktops are marginal in the overall vision. Yes, our desktops reflect our needs, our desires, what we really want. And the average Linux user, forcibly a geek obsessed with technical novelty, exasperated by personalization, moves well between KDE, GNOME, Hyperland, XFCE, and whoever else you want. I myself have created my personal theme. I even tried to create my own window manager. Okay, with not very exciting results. A screen recorder that doesn't work or a file manager that crashes are insignificant things for me. They're part of the game. I can see the scenario in its entirety, what my system really is and what it's capable of doing. But the world isn't made of us. It's not made of me. And I myself would have the pleasure of turning on the computer and enjoying for months a fluid, flat, undisturbed experience without worrying about Flatpak app icons that aren't visible on KDE with Void, about desktop folders that disappear with every reboot with GNOME, or about the already mentioned screen recorders. But I could continue with other examples, many others. macOS and Windows offer coherent and consistent experiences over time. The structure of macOS has been practically unchanged for 20 years. Sure, Apple recently redesigned the settings, making them similar to those of iOS, but we're talking about a marginal change, not a revolution. The same goes for Windows. Every time Microsoft has attempted the path of radical change, it has failed. Remember Windows Vista? Remember Windows 8? People never really accepted them. Why? Because people don't want to feel lost every 6 months. They want to turn on the computer and find themselves in a familiar environment, not in a new planet to explore. They want simple, logical, reliable choices. They want programs that start without uncertainties, repeatable behaviors over time, human and stable interfaces. Forget about abandoning X11 in favor of revolutions not yet mature. The average user doesn't seek novelty at all costs. They seek continuity and serenity. Those who play the big games, Red Hat, SUSE, Canonical, that is, the companies that really make money with Linux on the server side, use the desktop only as a battlefield to experiment and test, without really committing to offering a professional desktop experience. The Linux desktop is not a product. It's a testing ground. It's the range where they test technologies that will then end up in servers, in clouds, in containers. And us? We're the unpaid beta testers. The only voice out of the chorus is Canonical. But what are the results? Snap Store, centralization, RC kernels, Rust everywhere. Is this the path of mainstream Linux desktop? So is this the outburst of someone who despises Linux? Absolutely not. These are the real observations of someone who has used Linux for over 20 years, who has always refused proprietary software, who doesn't live inside the ecosystems of big companies, but has chosen to build a personal email server, an independent cloud, an image for their photos. This is not a voice out of the chorus. It's the voice of someone who loves Linux enough to want it better. Because Linux is superior, and Linux desktops are superior. They offer more solutions, a vast ecosystem, applications for every need. But my criticism is directed at the user experience, which too often requires high technical skills, manual interventions, improvised workarounds. It's an authentic experience, yes, but still too amateur to aspire to a truly professional standard. What I ask is that the bar be raised. Let's not continue to live in an endless cycle of numerical releases 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, each with small revolutions that risk breaking more than they add. Serenity, coherence, continuity are needed. Only in this way can the Linux desktop stop being an experimentation ground and finally become what it deserves, a mature, stable, and irresistible alternative, not only for us enthusiasts, but for anyone. The Linux desktop is an unfinished masterpiece. I would like us to finally find the path to complete it.